On Thanksgiving Day 2015, while families across America sat down to turkey dinners, two small children were dying behind closed doors. Their names were Shawn and Delilah. They didn't die in some forgotten corner of the world, not in a poor country, not a century ago. They died in California, one of the richest states and the wealthiest country in human history. For months, these children had been locked away in a bathroom no bigger than a closet. The floor was cold cement. They were forced to stay naked, huddled in the corner, forbidden to move, forbidden to cry, even forbidden to hug each other for warmth. If they broke the rules, punishment came quickly. Ice-cold water poured from the shower. Belts, golf clubs, and fists came crashing down on their tiny bodies. On that Thanksgiving Day, Shawn and Delilah's punishment turned fatal. The crime? They had stolen a single bagel. They were so hungry, so desperate, that they risked everything for a bite of food. While the rest of the household enjoyed turkey, mashed potatoes, and pies, the two children were beaten until their small bodies couldn't take any more. This was not hidden from the world. California's Social Services Department had a $50 million budget. Social workers had visited the house 5 times that same year. 5 times they saw the children. 5 times they walked away, writing the same words. No immediate threat detected. If we could see the future clearly, we would have stepped in, but back then, nobody stopped it. The only survivor of the siblings was their older sister, a 9-year-old girl. She barely lived through the nightmare. She was found one freezing night, locked inside a car, crying out for help. Her jaw was broken from a punch. Her shoulder and fingers were shattered. Several teeth were missing. She weighed only 40 pounds, the weight of a much younger child. She should have weighed at least 60. The children's grandmother had been searching for them for almost 2 years. She begged Child Protective Services for help. On May 19, 2015, CPS learned about her desperate search. They knew where the children were. They did nothing. Instead of saving her grandchildren, she was called to the morgue, forced to identify the bodies of Shawn and Delilah. Shawn was only 6 years old. At the time of his death, he weighed less than 30 pounds, the weight of a toddler. Delilah was 3 years old. She weighed only 18 pounds, far below any medical chart. The story ahead would shock even seasoned investigators. A trial was coming. Autopsy details would horrify doctors, and worse, at the center of it all was a disgusting romance between a 39-year-old woman and a 16-year-old boy whose favorite pastime was torturing helpless children. Before we go deeper into this painful but important story, I need your help. Every like, every subscription, every share of this video is a way to protect children like Shawn and Delilah. Please share their story everywhere, and in the comments, tell us your city and what time you're watching this. It matters because we need to know where people are ready to stand up for children. This isn't just one tragedy. This is about all of us. This is about whether we're willing to do better. Vivian Soche and Shatara were raising 3 children in California. The oldest girl was born in 2006. Then came Shawn in 2009, and finally Delilah in 2012. Shawn wasn't the biological son of his father, but that never mattered. He was raised as family. Life in Riverside and San Bernardino counties was never easy. The children's father battled substance abuse, and arrests came often. Money was always tight, but still the family tried to hold things together. Weekends at Grandma Deborah's house were the happiest times. Her home was loud, warm, and safe. Shawn loved to strut through the house, trying to walk like a grown man, something his sister would later write about in a heartbreaking letter to the judge. He dreamed of one day becoming a police officer, someone who would protect others. Little Delilah was full of light. She laughed easily, the kind of laughter that spread to everyone around her. Every drawing she made had the sun in the corner, a big bright yellow sun with rays stretching across the paper. The oldest girl, let's call her Jane, acted like a second mother. She protected her little brother and sister from bullies at school and always looked out for them. The children had known hardship, yes, but they had also known love. They had memories worth holding on to. There was the family trip to the coast, where the children stood amazed at the endless ocean. They built sand castles, chased seagulls, and laughed until their stomachs hurt. There was Halloween, when the whole family dressed up and went door to door. Little Delilah, dressed as Snow White, captured every neighbor's heart. For a while, they were just kids, with joy and hope. But everything changed in December 2013. The oldest girl would later describe it to a psychologist with just one haunting sentence: "Mom went out for milk and never came back." Vivian, their mother, was only 33 years old. She was struck by a car on the roadside in Yucaipa and died instantly. The children's father, now alone, tried to care for them, but he was already struggling, and grief pushed him further down a dangerous path. By spring of 2014, he was facing prison for drugs and illegal weapons. He had to decide what to do with the children, and then came the mistake that sealed their fate. Instead of turning to his mother Deborah, the one person who loved and wanted the children, he handed them to his cousin, Tommy Huntsman, in Salinas. He told the children it was temporary, just until he could sort things out. "I'll come back for you soon," he promised. But days later, he was arrested and sent to prison. The 3 children had already lost their mother. Now they were without their father too, and they were left in a stranger's home where they were never truly wanted. When Grandma Deborah found out her son was in jail, her first thought was of the children. She begged him to tell her where they were. Incredibly, he refused. He only said they were safe with relatives. Deborah began searching. She called agency after agency, begging for help. More than once, she was close to finding them, but no one stepped in. CPS workers could have told her where the children were. It would have cost them nothing, but they didn't. Instead of giving them to their biological grandmother, the system left them in the care of someone with no legal custody rights. And so the children arrived at 501 Fremont Street in Salinas. They missed their mother. They missed their grandmother, and they waited, believing their father would return. At first, life in the Huntsman household seemed almost normal. Tommy had 4 children of her own, 11-year-old twins, a 15-year-old son named Daniel, and an older daughter named Angelica who lived elsewhere. Her husband, Chriselle, worked long hours to keep food on the table. With 3 more children suddenly added, the house was crowded, but in the beginning, there were good days. The twins welcomed Shawn, Jane, and Delilah. They rode bikes around the neighborhood, played basketball in the driveway, and piled together on the couch to watch cartoons. Shawn tried hard to keep up with the older boys. The girls formed their own circle, playing with dolls and dressing up. Delilah, with her laugh that could fill a room, quickly became the favorite of everyone. The children even attended school. Jane made new friends. Shawn was learning to read, and for a while it seemed like life might steady itself. But there was someone else in the house, a 16-year-old boy named Gonzalo Curiel. He was Daniel's friend, a troubled teenager who never got along with his father. He started crashing on the couch in the living room. First, once in a while, then more often. Soon he was practically living there. By the fall of 2014, something had shifted between Tommy and Gonzalo. They spent late nights together in the kitchen, whispered conversations, cigarettes shared outside. By the end of the year, the truth came out. Chriselle, Tommy's husband, discovered the secret. His 39-year-old wife was sleeping with his son's 16-year-old friend. The household erupted in chaos. They moved into a cheap motel for a while. Eventually, Chriselle packed his things and left for good. No one called the police. No one reported the abuse of a minor. And the 3 Tara children, already fragile, already grieving, were left inside a home that was about to become their prison. By January 2015, the nightmare for the Tara children was only getting worse. 17-year-old Gonzalo Curiel had officially moved into the Huntsman apartment on Fremont Street. Only weeks later, Daniel, the Huntsman's teenage son, landed himself in juvenile detention. Suddenly, the home was left with Tommy, Gonzalo, the twins, and the 3 Tara children. The balance of power shifted overnight. Yesterday, Gonzalo had been just another boy hanging around the house. Now he claimed the master bedroom and began acting like he was in charge. And shockingly, Tommy didn't stop him. She let him take control. In fact, she encouraged it. For Shawn, Delilah, and Jane, life as they had known it was over. It started small. They were no longer invited to the family's dinner table. Instead, they were given scraps, a small portion of food, and then sent back to their room. Then came the bathroom punishments. At first, it was just an hour, then an entire night. Soon it stretched into days. That bathroom was no bigger than a closet, barely 3 feet wide and less than 6 feet long. The cement floor was freezing, and Gonzalo had moved the lock, so the door locked only from the outside. Tommy's twins still used the same bathroom. Sometimes, when they needed to go, the Tara children were let out. Quietly, the twins began using the bathroom more often than they actually needed, a small, silent act of kindness to give Shawn, Jane, and Delilah a little relief. But that was the only mercy. Soon, the punishments grew harsher. The children were stripped of their clothes and forced to stay naked. They weren't allowed to move, weren't allowed to cry, and weren't even allowed to hug each other for comfort. If they broke the rules, ice-cold water was dumped on them. Belts, golf clubs, shower heads, and fists rained down on their bodies. Instead of breakfast or lunch, they were tied with zip ties to a bed or a chair. For Gonzalo, tormenting the children became entertainment. He even filmed Jane, naked and crying under a freezing shower, on his cell phone. The children's suffering did not go completely unnoticed. At school, teacher Kimberly Capuan began to see the warning signs. When she took Jane and Shawn to the cafeteria, they piled food high on their plates, eating fast and greedily, as if terrified it would be taken away. Capuan was alarmed. She called Child Protective Services. The response didn't come quickly, but on April 9, 2015, a social worker finally arrived at the Fremont Street apartment after a neighbor also reported unsupervised children. The worker had the Tara family's entire history in her file, a record that went back to 1998, with 21 reports marked as high risk. But after a brief visit, she wrote down, "Apartment is dirty but not dangerous. Huntsman is cooperative. No immediate threats detected." The case was closed. The children remained where they were, with someone who had no legal custody and a system that knew it. On May 19th, there was a chance to change everything. A relative had called CPS, explaining that the children's grandmother had been searching desperately for them for over a year. A social worker returned to the Huntsman home. She told Tommy that the grandmother wasn't suitable for custody because the children's father had said so. She suggested Tommy file legal papers to gain custody herself. Tommy nodded. No one checked if she ever followed through. And most cruel of all, no one contacted the grandmother. The children continued to live in what can only be described as a legal vacuum. To the system, they were invisible. By June, things were spiraling even further. A neighbor heard Delilah's terrified screams through the thin apartment walls. She also heard the sound of blows. She called the police. A young officer showed up, took a quick look from a distance, and left. He reported no signs of violence detected. One of Tommy's own relatives came by when she wasn't home. What she saw was horrifying. Little Delilah, tied to a bed with plastic zip ties around her wrists. She freed the girl and later confronted Tommy in a rage. She even called CPS anonymously to report what she had seen. No one came. In July, Huntsman's own 12-year-old daughter finally gathered the courage to do what no adult had done. She called CPS herself. Her words were heartbreaking. "My mom is starving my uncle's children. Please come." The report was logged, but incredibly, no action was taken. It was swallowed up in the endless bureaucracy of the system. On August 27, 2015, social worker Lauren McFarland visited the home after repeated calls from teacher Capuan. She walked inside and saw filth everywhere. Cockroaches crawled on the walls. The apartment was suffocating with neglect. She looked at 6-year-old Shawn. His face was covered with bruises. "I slept on a toy," he whispered when she asked how it had happened. She turned to Jane. Her head had been shaved completely bald. The skin on her scalp was raw and inflamed from burns caused by cheap lice chemicals. The 3 children's legs were covered in flea bites. They were thin, weak, and starving. McFarland took photographs of the bruises, and then unbelievably, she wrote down the same words that had sealed their fate. Time and again, no immediate threat detected, and she left. That was the last time authorities saw Shawn and Delilah alive. Soon after, Huntsman enrolled the children in homeschooling, effectively erasing them from the education system. From that moment, they disappeared completely. By November, the children's bodies were giving out. Jane weighed only 45 pounds when she should have been at least 60. Shawn weighed 29 instead of 45, and little Delilah weighed just 18 pounds when she should have been closer to 30. Their bodies were literally consuming themselves, organs shrinking to critical levels. One day, Jane made a desperate attempt to escape. She tried climbing out of the bathroom window. Gonzalo caught her. He dragged her into the bedroom, and while Huntsman held her down, he beat her with a belt until her arm and shoulder broke. The bones began healing incorrectly. No one ever took her to a doctor. Another time, Gonzalo punched Jane so hard in the face he broke her jaw. But through all the pain, Jane still tried to protect her brother and sister. When they cried from hunger, she held them close and whispered that everything would be okay soon, though deep down, she didn't believe it. Then came November 26, 2015. Across the country, families were sitting around tables giving thanks for food and love. At Fremont Street, the Monterey County Probation Department had even delivered a large box of food to the Huntsman household. That evening, Tommy, Gonzalo, and the twins sat down at the kitchen table to enjoy a full Thanksgiving meal. Just 10 feet away, locked in the bathroom, 3 children sat huddled together on the cold floor. They could smell the turkey, they could hear the laughter, they could hear forks scraping plates, but they got nothing. Even on Thanksgiving, when the house was filled with food, Shawn, Jane, and Delilah were left to starve. Late that night, something unexpected happened. The bathroom door wasn't locked. Someone had forgotten to turn the key. Jane listened to the cries of her younger siblings. She couldn't take it anymore. Quietly, she crept into the kitchen. She took one bagel, just one. Back in the bathroom, she broke it into 3 pieces. Her brother and sister ate their crumbs in seconds. It wasn't enough to fill them. But at least for a moment, their hunger paused. That one act of love would lead to the most brutal night of their lives. By morning, the missing bagel was noticed. Tommy summoned all 3 children into the hallway. Gonzalo joined her. The beating that followed was long and merciless. Belts, fists, kicks. Jane eventually lost consciousness. When she woke, she was back on the bathroom floor. Next to her lay Shawn and Delilah, silent, motionless, their eyes closed. Panicked, she screamed. Tommy dragged her out of the bathroom and locked her in the bedroom. From behind the door, Jane heard noises, furniture being moved, whispered arguments, Gonzalo blaming himself, wanting to leave, Huntsman begging him to stay, promising they'd cover it up. The next morning, Shawn and Delilah were gone. Huntsman told Jane that another family had taken them, that they'd be better off. Jane knew it wasn't true. The following day, the household began packing. A large blue plastic container was loaded into the car. Its lid was taped tightly shut. As the car sped north toward Quincy, a smell began filling the air. Gonzalo brushed it off, as fish left behind from a trip. They drove with the windows rolled down, the freezing November wind whipping through the car. They stopped for the night at a Motel 6 in Dunnigan. Somewhere along the road, Tommy shared news with Gonzalo. She was pregnant. On December 4th, Huntsman rented a storage unit in Redding. The container and several boxes were placed inside. Immediately, the smell disappeared. Then, the family drove on to Quincy, a quiet mountain town where one of Tommy's distant relatives lived. The twins were enrolled in the local school, but Jane was kept locked up again, beaten, starved. On December 10th, 2015, a phone call changed everything. A neighbor spotted a child lying on the floor of a car. The engine was off. The windows rolled up. The child wasn't moving. The neighbor didn't wait. She didn't assume it wasn't her business. She called CPS. CPS alerted the police. A deputy sheriff soon arrived. Tommy met him at the door, calm and smiling. She explained that her niece had developmental delays and liked sitting in the car because it soothed her. But the deputy insisted on checking. What he found would haunt anyone. Inside the car lay Jane, and she looked like a skeleton. The scene inside the hospital was one that nobody could forget. Paramedics rushed Jane through the emergency doors in Sacramento. She was only 9 years old, but her body looked like that of a starving skeleton. Missing teeth, deep bruises, scratches, and open sores covered her tiny frame. Dirt was caked on her face. Her hair was matted with lice crawling through it. Her fingers were bent at wrong angles, and her legs could no longer support her weight. Doctors crowded around her bed, and the more they looked, the more they realized just how bad the abuse really was. X-rays revealed multiple fractures. Jane had been beaten so many times that her bones were broken in several places. She was critically malnourished, dehydrated, and suffering from multiple infections. Her jaw was shattered, her shoulder broken, the bone nearly piercing through the skin. fingers broken. Her body told the story of years of horror. One doctor who had been working in trauma medicine for over 20 years would later say this was the worst case of child abuse he had ever seen in his entire career. On December 11, 2015, police moved quickly. Tammy Huntsman and Gonzalo Curiel were arrested. The charges were staggering: child abuse, torture, and inflicting great bodily harm. Bail was set at $1 million each. Because Curiel was only 17, he was sent to a juvenile detention center in Butte County. At that moment, the authorities only knew about one victim, a mutilated, starving 9-year-old girl. But soon, whispers started spreading. People began asking questions. Why had Huntsman suddenly taken in 3 children from her cousin? Where were the other 2? Detectives went back to interrogate Gonzalo Curiel and Tammy Huntsman. Under pressure, Curiel broke first. He told investigators about a storage unit in Reading. That same night, detectives drove to Tarmac Road. When they opened the unit Huntsman had rented, they were hit with a wave of foul air. The smell of death filled the space. Inside, they spotted a large blue container. Detective Jeff Schmidt, who had served over 20 years on the force, opened the lid. Later in court, this seasoned officer could barely hold back tears. He described it as the single worst thing he had ever seen in his entire career. Inside were the bodies of Shawn and Delilah. Shawn, the little boy who once dreamed of becoming someone who could protect others. Delilah, the sweet little girl who loved to draw pictures of sunshine. Shawn was only 6 years old. Delilah was just 3. News of the discovery shook the entire nation. Major outlets ran horrifying details. Television screens filled with images of the blue container, the rundown apartment on Fremont Street, and school photographs of the children smiling, innocent, alive. We have new details tonight in a horrific crime in Reading. 2 children found dead in a storage unit. One anchor announced on national news. The story spread quickly. Tammy Joy Huntsman and her 17-year-old boyfriend, Gonzalo Curiel, arrested for abuse and torture. Murder charges had not yet been filed, but it was only a matter of time. Reporters soon revealed shocking family connections. Tammy Huntsman was the sister of Wayne Allen Huntsman, who had been arrested the year before for setting the King Fire in El Dorado County, a massive wildfire that burned nearly 100,000 acres. Police press conferences drew huge attention. This is obviously a very serious case, one officer explained. We are trying to be as thorough as possible. Investigators also revealed something chilling. Salinas police had actually received 2 anonymous calls in the past 6 months about suspected child abuse at Huntsman's home. Officers responded, but no action was taken. At least 4 complaints of neglect had also been filed with the Monterey County Department of Social Services over the past year. In fact, social workers had even spoken to the children back in August, but still, nothing was done. Now, the truth was undeniable. At the Shasta County morgue, medical examiner Mark Super performed autopsies on Shawn and Delilah. Even with decades of experience handling the worst cases, what he discovered stunned him. Shawn, 6 years old, stood 45 inches tall. His weight, just 29 pounds, the average weight of a healthy 2-year-old. Cause of death, blunt force trauma to the head, combined with extreme starvation. A blood clot was found in his brain, evidence of a brutal blow. One rib had been broken weeks earlier and healed incorrectly. His body was covered with bruises, some fresh, others older. Arms, legs, torso, head, even his genitals, some in places a child could never injure himself. His organs, including the liver, kidneys, and heart, were shrunken, consumed by starvation. Delilah, only 3 years old, weighed just 18 pounds. She didn't even appear on pediatric growth charts. Cause of death, the same as her brother. Severe head trauma and critical starvation. She too had a blood clot in her brain from a violent blow. Her upper arm bone was broken weeks before she died. Her lungs showed signs of pneumonia. Her tiny body had been trying to fight infection but had no strength left. Like her brother, her internal organs were undersized from malnutrition. Meanwhile, Jane remained in the hospital in Sacramento for several weeks. Doctors worked around the clock to stabilize her. Her infections were treated. Surgeons operated on her broken jaw. They had to re-break and reset her shoulder because the bone had fused incorrectly and was dangerously close to puncturing her skin. Even after her body began to heal, her mind carried deep scars. A child psychologist diagnosed Jane with severe post-traumatic stress disorder. Nightmares, flashbacks, fear of being alone, all haunted her. On December 17, 2015, the prosecutor announced what everyone expected. Tammy Huntsman and Gonzalo Curiel would face charges of first-degree murder with special circumstances. For Huntsman, this opened the possibility of the death penalty, but then another shocking twist. In February 2016, it was revealed that Huntsman had been pregnant when she was arrested, carrying Curiel's child. On July 22, 2016, she gave birth to a baby girl at Natividad Medical Center while still in custody. The infant was immediately taken by protective services and placed into foster care. Huntsman's 12-year-old twins were also removed from her custody. Their father, Chris L., tried to fight for them, claiming he had left Huntsman after learning about her relationship with a teenager and had no idea about the abuse. But authorities accused him of abandoning his children in a dangerous environment. The legal process stretched on for years. Finally, in February 2018, Huntsman accepted a plea deal. She pleaded guilty to all charges: 2 counts of first-degree murder, 3 counts of torture, child abuse, and conspiracy. In exchange, the death penalty was taken off the table. Her sentence: 2 consecutive life terms without the possibility of parole, plus 3 additional life terms, plus 9 more years. She waived all appeals. Tammy Huntsman will die in prison. Gonzalo Curiel, however, refused to take the deal. He went to trial in April 2018. Prosecutors built a replica of the small bathroom from Fremont Street, the same cramped, filthy space where the children had been locked for days at a time. The room was just 2.9 by 5'8", with a toilet and cold cement floor. Jurors were invited to step inside to feel for themselves what those children endured. Jane also testified. To protect her, a special screen was set up so she wouldn't have to look at Huntsman or Curiel. She told the court about the bathroom, the hunger, the beatings. She spoke of the bagel she split into 3 pieces, the last meal she shared with her siblings before Shawn and Delilah were killed. Nearly 3 years had passed, but her voice still shook with the trauma. People in the courtroom cried as they listened. On April 23, 2018, it took the jury just 1 hour and 20 minutes to reach a verdict. Gonzalo Curiel was found guilty on all counts. His sentence: 3 consecutive life terms. Because he was only 16 at the time of the crimes, he will be eligible for a parole hearing after 25 years. In the aftermath, Monterey County Social Services Director Elliot Robinson admitted publicly that the system had failed. So many warnings, so many reports, and still nothing was done. Nobody was punished for those failures. Instead, reforms were introduced: new protocols, better training, stricter oversight. But for Shawn and Delilah, it was too late. The siblings were laid to rest under a single headstone, together, forever. Shawn, the boy who wanted to protect others. Delilah, the girl who drew sunshine. Shawn was 6, Delilah was 3. They lived their short lives in one of the richest countries in the world, a place with food, with shelters, with laws meant to protect children, yet none of it reached them. Yes, 2 monsters killed them. But the truth is, their lives could have been saved if just one adult, one official, had done their job right. Rest in peace, Shawn and Delilah.